I've got a question for you. Why are there 7 days in the week? And what does that have to do with traditional astrology? Let's find out together on today's video about the 7 traditional planets. Hello everyone, my name is Geoffrey Ballinger. I'm a student of traditional astrology, and I'm happy to be back with you today with Satya Astrology to talk about the 7 traditional planets. So let's start out. First of all, why only 7? I thought there were 8 planets in the solar system, or 9 if you're a Pluto supporter. Well, for thousands of years, until the invention of the telescope, no one had any idea that Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto were out there. That meant all the time that traditional astrology was being developed as a system, people were looking to the visible planets, the planets you can see in the night sky, sometimes the morning sky or the evening sky, when you look up with just your own eyes. These planets are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But wait, didn't we say 7? That's because there's 2 more bodies in the sky that we wouldn't consider planets today, but that the ancients did. And that was the moon and the sun. They were also known as the diurnal luminary or the nocturnal luminary. They were, respectively, the leaders of the day team and the night team. It's a concept we'll talk about more later, but suffice it to say, that rounds up our 7 traditional planets. First a note, in the last video, we talked about the Ptolemaic model of the solar system. That's the idea that the solar system is centered on the Earth, and that you have concentric rings moving out, called celestial spheres, from the Earth. What that gives you is an order to the 7 traditional planets, known as a Ptolemaic order. In the Ptolemaic order, the planets are arranged in terms of speed, and also in terms of distance from the Earth, because the faster planets were thought to be closer to the Earth. As we go through the characteristics of each planet, we'll go through them in the Ptolemaic order, so it's useful to know. First, you have the fastest, which is the moon, and we'll move all the way through, in terms of speed, to the slowest, which is Saturn. So before we go through the characteristics of each planet and how you might use it in a traditional chart reading, we've got some groundwork to cover. These are central ideas related to the ancient worldview that will help unpack many of the characteristics of the planet and allow you to understand them on a deeper level. The very first thing that we'll talk about is the essential qualities. If you remember from the last video, we talked about the 4 elements. That is, earth, water, fire, and air, and how they're made up of the 4 qualities, which is hot and cold, moist and dry. Now, each planet is also assigned 2 qualities, and this helps to define their characteristics. For example, going through in Ptolemaic order, the moon is cold and moist. Mercury is moderately cold and dry, with its dryness being more important. Venus is moderately cold and moist, but especially moist. The sun is hot and dry, with the heat being more important. Mars is excessively hot and dry. Jupiter is moderately hot and moist. Saturn is excessively cold and dry. You'll notice that the relative heat of the planets has to do with their distance from the sun. The first distinction that I want to talk about is the difference between benefic and malefic planets. Simply put, benefic means positive, and malefic means negative, but it's a little more nuanced than that when we get to the planets. If you remember the essential qualities of each planet, you'll notice that certain planets sound a little more hospitable than others. For example, I'd much rather live on Jupiter than I would on dry and cold Saturn. So, let's take a closer look. We remember that Jupiter is moderately hot and moist. That sounds a little bit like a jungle. Not everyone here might enjoy tropical weather, but jungles are certainly a fertile place. It's where life is expansive and enthusiastic and bursting forth. That's why it was considered the greater benefic, because it has qualities that are seen to support life. Venus, in comparison, was seen as moderately cold and moist. So rather than a jungle, think a little bit more of, well, England. England might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's certainly also a fertile place. After the spring rains, the greens that burst forth are incredible. And some people might prefer that kind of environment. So, that's why we consider Venus to be the lesser benefic. Now, I'm throwing around terms like greater and lesser here, but there's a reason for it. It's not a value judgment necessarily. What it's about is the level of the positives that each planet brings, or negatives, as we'll see later. For example, Jupiter is seen as attached to higher ideals, truth, religion, rulership, generosity, which is why it's called the greater benefic. Whereas Venus is associated with lower ideals, for example, pleasure and beauty, which is why it's called the lesser benefic. Now let's move on to the trickier ones, the malefics. If you remember, Saturn is considered excessively dry and cold because it's so far away from the sun. It sounds a bit like Antarctica. Or, let's go a little bit more extreme, that sounds like the surface of the moon. Definitely not a place you would want to live. At least most people wouldn't want to live there. That's why it's called the greater malefic. Mars, in contrast, since it's closer to the sun, is considered excessively hot and dry. So rather than the surface of the moon, you might think of the Sahara Desert. Also not the most hospitable place you could imagine. That's why it was called the lesser malefic. So Saturn is the greater malefic because it's associated with higher ideals like death, time, limits, and discipline. Whereas Mars is considered the lesser malefic because it's associated with lower ideals such as violence and conflict. From there, the division gets a little more complicated. Generally, the luminaries were considered to be benefic, but it's quite nuanced. For example, if you remember, the sun is considered to be extremely hot and dry. It's not as dry as Mars, so it's considered a little more hospitable to life. However, that heat is a problem. Once a planet gets too close to the sun, you'll notice in some charts, the signification of the planet is burned up and it loses strength, just like you might lose strength if you got heat stroke. This shows the malefic side of the sun. The moon, however, was considered to be moderately cold and moist. It's also more hospitable to life, and thus more benefic than the malefic planets. However, its phase and position in the chart are extremely important to determining its strength. Mercury, meanwhile, is neutral. That means, on its own, it's neither benefic or malefic. However, it depends on who it associates with. If Mercury is associated with, connected to, a negative or malefic planet in the chart, it can be considered a malefic. If it is connected to or associated with a benefic planet in the chart, it can be considered a benefic. Of course, its retrograde phase and sign strength are other important factors. We'll talk more about planetary strength later, but in short, it's the way to determine how effective a planet is in bringing about its goals, be they positive or negative. There's a lot of factors to consider, and we'll talk about them later, but they include things like, is the planet happier in a day chart or a night chart? Is the planet in a sign that it enjoys or a sign that it's uncomfortable in? Is the planet connected to other positive, supportive planets? Or is it connected to, aspecting, negative planets? Is it moving forward or moving backwards? These are all different conditions that we'll talk about that allow us to see how strong a planet is in a given chart. The next key division of the planets is into masculine and feminine planets. Now, this gender binary might sound a little strange, especially to a modern ear, but it's not necessarily the same use of the term that we have today. certain planets were considered feminine or masculine, but these can be thought in a myriad of different ways. I've heard yin and yang, active and passive. But why is it important? It has to do with sign placement. For example, a feminine planet would probably be more comfortable in a feminine sign, whereas a masculine planet is more comfortable in a masculine sign. In general, the masculine planets are the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The feminine planets are Venus and the Moon. Western culture has long associated the Sun with the king and the Moon with the queen, and Venus, of course, as the goddess of love, is pretty clear, whereas Mars is associated with the god of war. So these cultural connections are quite obvious. Mercury's a little tricky. Mercury, again, is a bit of a wild card. It's considered neutral, which means it could be either masculine or feminine, depending upon its phase. If Mercury rises before the Sun, if it's in its morning phase, then it's considered masculine. If it sets after the Sun, then it's in its evening phase and is considered feminine. For example, if the Sun is in Aries and Mercury is in Pisces, then it rises before the Sun, it's in its morning phase and is masculine. However, if the Sun is in Aries and Mercury is in Taurus, it will set after the Sun, which means it's in its evening phase and is feminine. The last division of the planets that we'll talk about today is between the diurnal and nocturnal planets. The diurnal planets, which are thought to be happier in day charts, are the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. And the nocturnal planets, which are thought to be happier in night charts, are the Moon, Venus, and Mars. So the Sun and the Moon are pretty straightforward. The Sun is the diurnal luminary, or the king of the day. It's the leader of the day team. The Moon is the queen of the night. It's the nocturnal luminary, the leader of the night team. With the Benefics, Jupiter is considered to be the diurnal benefic because the heat of the day supports its naturally hot and moist qualities. The cool of the night, however, naturally supports the cool, moist qualities of the nocturnal benefic, which is Venus. With the Malefics, the ancients were looking for qualities that would go against the natural qualities of the Malefics and try and tone down some of its more unhospitable characteristics. For example, Saturn is excessively cold and dry, so putting it in the day team would allow the heat of the day to warm up that excessive coldness. Meanwhile, the cool of the night calms down the excessive heat of Mars, which is the nocturnal malefic. Mercury, again, is the odd one out here. If you remember, if it rises before the Sun, then it's in its morning phase. This means it's masculine and diurnal. If it sets after the Sun, it's in its feminine phase, which means it's in its evening or nocturnal phase, and is thus in the nocturnal sect. In the Ptolemaic model of the solar system, the closest traditional planet to the Earth was the Moon. In fact, everything on Earth was considered to be in the sublunary sphere, that is, under the Moon. This intermediary position of the Moon meant that the ancients saw it as transmitting the emanations from other planets to Earth. In that way, it became the central agent of change on Earth. You can see where its signification of change comes from if you watch it change phases as it moves across the night sky. In terms of sign strength, the Moon's domicile is the sign of Cancer. It is in detriment in the opposite sign, the sign of Capricorn. It is in exaltation at 3 degrees of Taurus and has its fall at 3 degrees of Scorpio. It also rules the earthly triplicity by night, that is, the signs of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. In terms of general significations, the Moon is associated with change, of course, but it is also associated with vitality and the human body, basically physical existence. It can also be associated with conception and motherhood, as well as travel and anything to do with the sea. Because of its association with the human body, the moon played a central role in ancient medicine. In late medieval Europe, for example, surgeons would have to consult astrological charts to decide times for operations, such as bleeding. They would look at the phase and position of the moon to be able to determine an optimum time. For example, if the moon was in the sign of Gemini, which is usually associated with the hands and the arms, they would not perform any surgery or any operation having to do with the hands and arms. In modern astrology, the moon is more often associated with the subconscious and emotions. In short, someone's internal world. If we look back through history, one important lunar native is H.G. Wells. Considered the father of science fiction, he foresaw many technological developments, including the nuclear bomb, tanks and aircraft, and even the internet. He's a good example of someone whose connection to the subconscious and foresight allowed him to predict what our future would be like. The second fastest traditional planet, Mercury, zips through the zodiac in about a year, give or take its retrograde periods. It's never more than 27 degrees away from the Sun. Mercury is an interesting planet. As we've mentioned before, it can be either diurnal or nocturnal, either benefic or malefic, either masculine or feminine. The planets that it associates with by aspect will change a lot of its significations. This mixed nature probably comes from its appearance in the night sky. Because it's so close to the Sun, Mercury often disappears, and, due to its retrograde, its motion is often erratic. Even when it is visible in the night sky, it emits a twinkling light. Its ancient Greek name, Stilbon, means the glistener. Vettius Valens commented on Mercury's changeable nature in his work The Anthologies. He said, "This star's effects may go in many directions, depending on the changes of the zodiac and the interactions of the stars, and yields quite varied results." In general, however, Mercury is considered to be dry and somewhat cold, giving it a melancholic temperament. By sign, it has its domiciles in Gemini and in Virgo, and is also exalted at 15 degrees of Virgo. It is in detriment in Sagittarius and in Pisces, and has its fall in Pisces. It rules the airy triplicity by night, that is, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. The association between Mercury, communication, education, and the written word is an ancient one. The Mesopotamians connected the planet to their scribe god, Nabu. The ancient Greeks, meanwhile, connected it to Hermes, the messenger god. Mercury has long been associated with divination, especially astrology, but it is also connected to a number of other professions. Mathematics, geometry, sport, and youth are all associations of Mercury, as are commerce and trade, especially things having to do with currency. For example, if you've ever seen this symbol, you've seen the winged staff of Mercury, and it's associated with medicine even today. On a more negative note, Mercury is sometimes associated with gambling, deception, and tricksters, basically anyone who tricks you using their wits. The association with communication and the written word is a strong one, but nowadays there's also an association with technology. Anyone who's had their computer go on the fritz during Mercury retrograde can attest to this fact. A figure from history with Mercury in the first house is Al-Biruni. He was a famous scholar living in the 10th and 11th centuries who served as a court astronomer for Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni. He was also a famed mathematician and astronomer, but his best-known works have to do with the traditions, history, and culture of India. Next, let's talk about the lesser benefic, Venus. Venus is one of the two feminine planets, along with the moon. It's also nocturnal, and its essential qualities of cold and moist give it a melancholic temperament. In mythology, it's connected to the ancient Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. In Mesopotamia, it was associated with the goddess Ishtar, also known as Inanna. This goddess was not only a goddess of love, but also of fertility, of agriculture, and in some parts of the region, even war. Many of the associations of Venus can be connected to its appearance in the night sky. It's quite beautiful to behold, and is one of the brightest objects in the sky during certain points in its orbit. It can be especially bright in the morning before the sun rises, or in the evening right after the sun sets, so it's sometimes known as the morning or evening star. The general associations of Venus are pretty well known. It's connected to beauty, pleasure, and love. It's also connected to fun and friendship, as well as art and artists, and, because it's a feminine planet, connected to women in general. A native with a strong Venus in their chart might have these characteristics of love and beauty, but they might also just have very influential women in their life. The planet is also connected to adornment, things such as makeup or clothes, and a general aesthetic sense. If Venus is weaker or poorly positioned in someone's chart, it could represent too much of a good thing, things such as overdoing pleasure or a tendency towards intoxication. Addiction is another prominent theme. In terms of sign, Venus rules Taurus and Libra. It's exalted in Pisces. The planet is in detriment in the Mars-ruled signs of Aries and Scorpio, and has its fall in Virgo. It rules the Earth triplicity, that is, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, by day. There is a lot of interesting connections between the planets, but one of the most important relationships in astrology is the relationship between Mars and Venus. Just like in ancient Greek astrology, you had a very compelling relationship between the goddess of love and the god of war. The two planets oppose each other. One is the lesser Benefic, and the other is the lesser Malefic. But you'll also notice that Mars is uncomfortable in the Venus-ruled signs, and Venus is uncomfortable in the Mars-ruled signs. Judy Garland is one prominent example of a historical figure with Venus in the first house. She was a well-known celebrity in her time, and got her start early. She took to the stage for the first time at the age of 2, and landed her first prominent role at the age of 13. She was a well-known actress, singer, and dancer, and performed in over 30 movies and 1,000 concerts. She is a perfect example of the beautiful artist. It's no accident that today we think of the sun sign as your most important sign, even though throughout history it was often the rising sign that had more of an impact on the life of the native. The sun is the most obvious body in the sky. It divides day and night, light and dark, winter and summer. Its path traces the ecliptic, which is roughly the path that determines the signs of the zodiac. It's no surprise that we should prioritize the sun, which is typically a symbol of the self, in such an egocentric day and age. The sun is associated with the Greek god Apollo, who was the god of light but also of the arts. In terms of general significations, the sun often represents rulers. It is the king of the sky after all. This could be anyone from an emperor to a governor, or anyone who steps up to the plate, even if they're not normally so important. Another important significator is truth. Sometimes this could be connected to a higher truth, or even to God. This is evident. The light of the sun cuts through the darkness, showing us clearly what is and is not real. The sun is of course considered hot and dry, though it's more temperate than Mars, but this gives it a choleric temperament. You'll notice that in the celestial spheres, the sun still inhabits a central position. There are 3 planets below it and 3 planets above it. This forms the dividing line between what were called the inferior planets, Mercury, the Moon, and Venus, and the superior planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Their roles are determined not by their importance or size, but by their position relative to the Sun in the Ptolemaic model. The Sun's domicile is Leo at the height of summer, and its detriment is in Aquarius, in the dead of winter. Aquarius is also a Saturn-ruled sign, and Saturn was traditionally considered to be the enemy of the luminaries, especially the Sun. The Sun is exalted at 19 degrees of Aries in the spring, and has its fall in Libra, as fall begins to set in. It rules the fiery triplicity, that is Aries, Sagittarius, and Leo, by day. While the Sun is generally considered to be a benefic, its heat can make it destructive in certain circumstances. If another planet gets too close to the Sun, then it enters a condition known as combustion, or moves under the rays of the Sun. This is clearly evident if you look up at the sky. The planet becomes invisible. Its literally outshone by the sun. Traditional texts will sometimes compare this to a man coming down with a fever. The significations of the planet are temporarily weakened. However, once the planet reaches the center of the sun, or within 17 degrees according to some medieval astrologers, then it enters a very powerful position known as cazimi. Cazimi is likened to someone sitting in the throne of the king. They're temporarily given the powers of the king. With the sun in the first house, the Bollywood actor Shah Rukh Khan is an important example of a solar native. He's known as the King of Bollywood and has starred in a number of films. He's famous for saying things such as, "I did not come here to compete, I came here to rule." What better example of a solar personality with a dynamic, king-like outlook? The blood-red glow of Mars, the lesser Malefic, in the night sky might be why many cultures have considered it a harbinger of doom and destruction throughout history. The ancient Mesopotamians associated it with their god of sickness and death, Nergal, whereas the ancient Greeks associated it with the war god, Ares. Thus you have the planet associated with destruction, death, and conflict, but it can also represent a heroic archetype, a classic martial courage. From its many significations, it's pretty clear what the ancients thought of Mars. It's connected to conflict, violence, quarrels, accidents, pain, and separation. It's also connected to the metal iron, an association that sometimes made it the planet of blacksmithing. It's also associated with surgery because of its connection to separation and cutting. However, the planet can also represent heroes, a classic martial archetype. In terms of sign, Mars's domiciles are Aries and Scorpio. It's exalted in Capricorn and has its fall in Cancer, and it's in detriment in the Venus-ruled signs of Libra and Taurus. Mars rules the watery triplicity by day and night, that is, Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. A positive Mars could represent someone with drive and courage, someone who's willing to stand up for what's right and defend people who are weaker than them. These are people who get things done using their unstoppable willpower. However, a poorly placed Mars can represent a bully, someone willing to do anything to dominate. This could also represent misdirected martial energy, someone who misplaces their aggression. One famous historical figure with Mars in the first house is Henry VIII. He's famous for his 6 wives, 2 of which ended up beheaded. His disagreement with Pope Clement VII over divorce was what separated the Church of England from the Catholic Church, starting the English Reformation, and changing English history forever. He was a large, imposing figure, and excelled at physical sports, especially hunting and jousting. However, typical of a Mars native, he was also prone to bouts of temper. Next up, you have the greater Benefic, Jupiter. This diurnal planet was considered hot and moist. Because these qualities support life, it's thought to be a positive planet overall. It has a sanguine temperament. In the night sky, it shines clear and blue. The ancient Mesopotamians associated Jupiter with the god Marduk, who was the most important god in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The Greeks associated him with Zeus, also the ruler of the gods. Both of these figures underline Jupiter's importance as a significator of leaders, rulers, but also of pleasure and generosity. Jupiter's significations include prosperity, wealth, inheritance, knowledge, freedom, and generosity. Could represent great gifts, as well as powerful people. Not only rulers, but also judges are associated with Jupiter, as are religious leaders. We're not just talking about material wealth here, but also spiritual wealth. It's not surprising that the planet associated with Zeus is also associated with fertility, particularly male fertility. In terms of sign, Jupiter's domiciles are Sagittarius and Pisces, with Sagittarius representing the curious and intellectual passion of the planet, whereas Pisces represents more of a spiritual generosity. Jupiter is an exaltation in Cancer and has its fall in Capricorn. The planet is in detriment in the Mercury-ruled signs of Gemini and Virgo. This is because Mercury is concerned with the details, whereas Jupiter is more about the big picture. Mercury-ruled signs might have trouble seeing the forest through the trees. While a positive Jupiter can represent a magnanimous, fun-loving personality, a poorly placed Jupiter can signify issues with substance abuse or someone who's egocentric, maybe a bit too big for their shoes. A positive Jupiter can also represent connections to powerful people or gifts or blessings from powerful friends. An important historical figure with Jupiter in the first house is Pope Benedict XVI. As the head of the Catholic Church from 2005 to 2013, his motto was "God is love." He thought that God spoke to people not only through the Bible, but also through the Church. His outlook is a classic example of a Jupiterian perspective. The idea of love and optimism as being central to faith and religion. Last but not least, we come to the greater Malefic, Saturn. The farthest away of the visible planets, the light that Saturn emits is dark, dim, and weak. It's definitely not as beautiful as the shining Venus or the cool Jupiter. As a result, the planet saw it as a dark, isolated, and lonely place. It is associated with old age, limits, self-denial, time, and even death. The ancient Greeks connected the planet to Kronos, the leader of the Titans, and the opponent and father of Zeus. Saturn, because of its distance from the Sun, is considered cold and dry, giving it a melancholic nature. Indeed, it was often seen as the enemy of the luminaries, the enemy of life and light. By sign, it has its domiciles in Aquarius and Capricorn in the dead of winter. It's exalted in Libra and has its fall in Aries, and is in detriment in the signs ruled by the luminaries, that is, Leo and Cancer. It rules the air signs by night, that is, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Not all of the planet's significations are bad. It is sometimes symbolized as a wise old man, or perhaps a teacher. The discipline and boundaries shown to us by teachers can ultimately be helpful, even if they're not always pleasant. You may see some depictions of Saturn bearing a scythe. While in modern culture, the scythe is usually associated with the Grim Reaper, it was not always a symbol of death. It's originally an agricultural tool, and especially the Romans would associate Saturn with agriculture. After all, it takes a lot of discipline and hard work to be able to reap your crops at the end of the season. The ancient Romans also celebrated the festival of Saturnalia, which was an agricultural festival, typified by the giving of gifts, as well as controlled bursts of public hysteria. A well-positioned Saturn might mean that the native has the discipline to excel in life, no matter how poorly a hand they were dealt at the beginning. They know how to rise above, how to use the limited resources that they've received to achieve greatness. This is why ambition is often associated with Saturn. However, Saturn is also connected to fear, to isolation. A poorly associated Saturn could be someone who isolates themselves, someone who lives their anxieties and retreats into darkness. A classic example of a Saturnian native is Marsilio Ficino, the 15th century Italian scholar. He was a proponent of the Stoic philosophy. However, he was also born with a hunchback. Since astrology at the time was common knowledge, he was aware that he had Saturn in the first house, and blamed it both for his physical deformity and for his Saturnian nature. However, he was able to overcome the limitations that he was born with to become well-known and a very important scholar of his time. He said, "Saturn seems to have impressed the seal of melancholy on me from the beginning." And that's our complete guide for the 7 traditional planets. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.